Hey, this is Ari. Welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. With me today is Jana Danielson, who is an award-winning wellness entrepreneur, best-selling author, founder of Lead Pilates and Lead Integrated Health Therapies, and a pelvic floor health expert. She's also the creator of the Cooch Ball, which I have a funny story about. And this is the world's first patented pelvic floor fitness tool for women. She's coached and consulted with tens of thousands of women from all over the world to help improve their quality of life, their confidence, and their impact on the world. And in this episode, we're talking all about pelvic floor health and how to improve yours, particularly with a focus on women. So enjoy this episode. So first of all, I have to start off by giving you a little confession. Or confession might not be, well, yeah, confession's a little bit of the right word. So we met in person a few months ago at Mindshare, and you were handing out a little package and a little device. And I didn't know what it was. And you just sort of walked by, and you, as I was in conversation, you handed me this thing and you told me it was a Cooch Ball. And I looked down at it, and my brain took a few seconds to figure out what a Cooch Ball is. And then I was like, oh, well, that's pretty cool. Okay, I like what this lady's up to. This is good stuff. And then I was walking around for like 2 hours carrying a Cooch Ball, and I didn't have a bag to put it in. And I was staying at the hotel that was sort of a 15-minute walk away. So I didn't have my hotel room nearby. I didn't have anywhere to put it. So I'm just walking around for hours carrying a Cooch Ball, which is not the most appropriate thing for someone without a cooch, so to speak. And so my confession is this. My confession is I gave the Cooch Ball to someone else. I didn't keep it.
Okay.
I told my wife this morning because I told her that I was going to be interviewing you later, and my wife was mad at me for not keeping the Cooch Ball for her. So anyway, starting off with that confession, it's off my shoulders now. Let's get into your story. So how did you get into this whole field, and how did you come to develop the Cooch Ball?
Okay. So let me first of all, just as a Catholic girl, I can appreciate the confessional experience. And I didn't obviously do a good enough job when I did my flyby and handed it out to you, because it is a co-branded product. So it is a Cooch Ball for those of us that have a cooch.
Please don't tell me I'm supposed to put it up my butt.
No. But I have had that question. They're like, it's a 5-inch ball. Where is this supposed to go? And I'm like, no, that's not where it goes. But for guys, it's co-branded as the Cooch Ball. So it is a co-branded product for men and women to improve pelvic fitness, health. And you know what? Let your wife know that I'll hook her up and you with another product, because guys and girls do use it.
As long as you're not going to make me put it up my butt, I'm down.
It is. No, it is. You are going to it's staying outside of all bodily orifices. It is staying on the outside of our body. So let me loop back to your question about how I got into this whole, just this world of pelvic floor health. And so I'm a business consultant by trade. My original career was helping businesses get healthier. And my own pain journey in my early 20s, about 2 years worth of doctors and specialists at the end of 21 years of age, finding myself on 11 different medications, being told by my physician that the team that was helping me believed that the pain was in my head, that I was seeking attention and I should have a nice life, took me into what I call my dark night of the soul, where I really was quite disconnected from. On the outside, I looked healthy, but inside I felt like I was really dying. And so Pilates was my vehicle that took me to the realization that I was searching for healing outside of me, somebody else to heal me. And what I didn't realize, or what I maybe forgot, was that the healing was within my body. I just had to figure out some really hard lessons to get to that point. So 16 weeks after my first Pilates mat class, I literally had weaned myself off of all 11 medications, thinking it was just a fluke, didn't tell anyone, knocking on wood, throwing salt over my shoulder, all those things that, you know, that you do to make sure that your luck sticks with you. And I started to realize that a lot of my pain, which was digestive in nature, but when you have digestive pain, any kind of pain, your body locks you down. We're like a DNA helix that gets, you know, kind of forward rounded because we live on a planet with gravity. All these things were working against me as I was protecting myself from the pain. Fast forward, got married, became the mom of 3 boys. And my friend told me one day, like, welcome to the P Club. You have a lifetime membership. It costs you nothing. Your decision to become a mom gives you lifetime access. And I was like, what? And as I went through my career,
The P as in the letter P, or
the PEE
okay,
club, like,
got it.
yeah, yeah, okay.
As in
So,
like loss of pelvic floor function.
yeah, exactly. Like, here we go. The incontinence product aisle is a weekly stop now at the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing my Pilates certification at that time, and I started teaching out of my home. I then built my little Pilates studio that grew into a 9,000 square foot, you know, integrated wellness clinic and Pilates studio. And that conversation kept coming back to over and over and over to almost haunt me. And I kept asking the question, why do we think this way? I started having these workshops that would sell out, and it was like I was presenting to crickets because no one would ask me anything. Yet at the end of every workshop, I would have a line of women in tears telling me how I was speaking directly to them. And I was really overwhelmed by the unconnectedness or the disconnectedness that we have to our own body, that we just believe that when we become a mom, when we go through menopause, men with erectile dysfunction, all of these things are because we had another trip around the sun, another candle on our cake, and we should just accept it as truth. And I did some work with a urogynecologist from Nevada, and he helped me realize that the pelvic floor, as the floor of the core, responds to the diaphragm. So if we're not breathing, guess what, everyone? The pelvic floor is going to start to become dysfunctional because it relies on the diaphragm to give it cues. That's the first thing. The second thing is when we have a lack of oxygen, nutrient-rich blood to any tissue in the body, any tissue, those cells can't flourish. So if we are guarding, if we are energetically disconnected, if we believe the stories that we're told about being a mom, going into menopause, erectile dysfunction, pain during intercourse, there is going to be a lack of connection there. And I just decided that I was going to make a difference. I was going to create a product. And the next day, after all of this epiphany that I had, I started getting on the phone with sporting goods manufacturers like Spalding and Wilson. And I introduced myself as Jana Danielson from Saskatoon, Canada. And I had this idea to change pelvic floor health in women and men. And I got laughed at, I got hung up on, but I didn't stop. I kept going until I found a path to create the product, to launch the product. And in fact, I was the winner of a entrepreneurial pitch competition with the Home Shopping Network, and was supposed to go back to Tampa in April of 2020 to shoot an 8-minute sample show on the Home Shopping Network. And then the gift of COVID landed in our laps 3 weeks before then. So I called an audible, like a quarterback on a football team, and I put up a landing page and started doing healthy pelvic floor webinars. And really, the rest is history. And the people that I have impacted, not just women, but men and even children. I've had moms get the cooch ball for their tween-year-old, 10, 11-year-old daughters that just are craving to go to a sleepover at their girlfriends' homes, but are wetting the bed, have tried everything and realize that it is this tension in the pelvic floor. So that's how I show up. That's how the product came to be. And I just love when I get to share that story.
Yeah, beautiful story. So why should people care so much about their pelvic floor health? Maybe this is something that, okay, you go to a trampoline park and maybe you can't hold your urine inside as well as you're jumping, or you sneeze and a little bit leaks out or something like that. Is it just that? Is it minor inconveniences, or is it something beyond that? And how does this affect people's lives, and how common is it?
I wish it was just as minimal as jumping on a trampoline or, training for that first 10K or sneezing or coughing. It really is so much more. It really connects into our confidence, our sensuality, and really who we are, because it's talked about so infrequently. I think a lot of people believe that they're probably one of the only ones going through it. So we don't talk about it. We don't. And so let's just start there. From a functional perspective, our pelvic floor in a woman's body, the way our anatomy is built, it holds up those pelvic organs. Our uterus, our bladder, are two main examples of that. And so because we live on a planet with gravity, because our posture over the decades of our lives is less than optimal, and because we are a structure, gravity in its simplest form is going to impact a structure that is out of alignment in the sense of the dissension of these organs. So a woman could wear high heel shoes, for 40 years based on her career. And because of that unnecessary force, the way her foot position is in her shoes, she doesn't necessarily have to have had a baby to have pelvic floor issues. All right. So over time, what starts to happen is you cough and sneeze a little bit and there's some pee. And yeah, it's a little embarrassing, but you deal with it. But over time, the function of those organs starts to descend more and more and more. And there's 4 different levels of prolapse. Grade 1, which can be repaired. It can be totally reversed. Grade 2, there's a little bit more dissension. By the time there's a grade 3 prolapse, the organ, whichever organ it is literally at the opening of the vagina. And then the 4th grade is that your organ is outside of the body.
Whoa.
And that actually happens, right? And that's where you need medical intervention.
Surgery, basically.
Surgery. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. So there's the functional part of that. There's also the energetic part of, like, our pelvis is like a cauldron. Okay. It is like this magical cauldron where the second chakra is spinning like this beautiful little vortex. Okay. The sacral chakra, the root chakra is in and around that. And then of course we have the 3rd chakra just above it. And so we have all these energy centers that connect to our feeling safe and grounded, being able to express ourselves, having love, giving love and receiving love. And so I think it's really short-sighted to only look at the pelvic floor from that physical, am I coughing and sneezing and peeing, or not? If that's where the discussion ends, we are missing so much of the beautifulness of the change that can happen in confidence, in sensuality. I mean, depending on how you were raised, what religion you were raised in, the type of home you were raised in, the pelvic floor area can be an area of our body that we're disconnected from. There is a lot of trauma that happens around that area as well. So for a lot of us, we would just choose to pretend that it did not exist versus really grounding into it and understanding how it functions, what are the energetics around it, and how can it connect into the confidence and sensuality of our lives.
What's the prevalence of this? How many women are dealing with grade 1, 2, 3 levels of prolapse?
Yeah. So I'll use a US stat, there are over 30 million women dealing with some sort of pelvic floor dysfunction. All right.
That's got to be close to 20% of US women.
Exactly. It's almost 1 in 5, 1 in 4 women is dealing with some form of a pelvic floor dysfunction. Now, just so for our listeners to understand, I think sometimes we get stuck on that coughing, sneezing, laughing, peeing, right? But there's a whole other side of, if this was a spectrum, the pelvic floor can be too tight. It's called hypertonic, too much, okay? Too much tone. And that's where we see some of those, I'll call them outcomes, like the coughing and sneezing and peeing a little bit. There might be pain during intercourse. There might be chronic pelvic floor pain, tight hips in a man's body. Erectile dysfunction, about 90% of erectile dysfunction actually is not a medical issue. It is a fitness/movement issue, because when the muscles of the pelvic floor get too much tone, too tight, blood flow to the penis cannot happen. All right. So then we buy in to the solution of being a little blue or a little pink pill, which, by the way, is manufactured nitric oxide, which we produce in our body through breathing, right? And so I just want people to understand that there is the too tight end of the spectrum, but there also is the other end of the spectrum, which is the lack of tone. Okay. Hypotonic. So there could be something called urge incontinence. And I mean, many of us probably have experienced this, where we have bags of groceries or maybe that bucket seat with our baby in it, and we get to the front door. We don't have to go to the bathroom right this second, but we get our hand on the doorknob and there's something from our brain that sends a message, and we literally drop everything, run to the bathroom, undoing our pants as we go. Cause you have that's that urge that sets in. So those are some of the common symptoms, but Ari, there are other things like chronic low back pain, cold, tingly feet, constipation. These are other situations in our body that we might not connect the dot directly between pelvic floor health and symptom.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Okay. So what's the solution? What should people do, women do, about their pelvic floor dysfunction?
Yeah. All right. So I really wish this answer was more dramatic and more complicated, but it really is.
That's great.
Really
This is
okay?
great news. If it's simple and hopefully easy too.
It's simple and easy.
Simple is a great start, but if it's simple and easy, that's even better.
Yeah. So the first thing is, and you're going to appreciate this, right? Because of where you come from the, the breathing for energy, mindset and framework, is that you can do all those fancy, you can go, I know there's, medical spas where you can go and pay big bucks to sit on that fancy seat that creates the pelvic floor contractions. And you can do that all day long, and it'll help initially. And then unless you keep going, it's not going to do much for you. The number one thing to do is to start to learn how to breathe properly. And if we don't learn that, and there's lots of ways to breathe. Okay. Don't get me wrong. When it comes to pelvic floor health, it truly is the diaphragmatic breathing that is going to start to, it's almost like giving CPR to your pelvic floor. All right. The reality is that so many of us breathe with the secondary respiratory muscles, the scalenes and the sternocleidomastoids in the neck. And that's why so many of us live with chronic neck tension, TMJ issues, low-grade headaches, because we're using the muscles that are holding up our head to actually breathe. And we don't get down to that mushroom cap or open umbrella shaped diaphragm. So when you understand the anatomy of your body, the diaphragm being the roof and the pelvic floor being the floor of your core, the 4 other abdominal muscles create the cylinder. When you understand that relationship, doing 10 to 12 diaphragmatic breaths in through your nose and out through your mouth in a day will really start to wake up the tissues of the pelvic floor. All right. So that's the very most first simple thing to do. The second step to that is to bring that oxygen-rich, nutrient-rich blood to that area. And so that's where there are certain tools you can use internally to make that happen. As a Pilates instructor, I wanted something that was I could throw in my backpack or throw in my suitcase and take with me. And so in a 3-minute experience, if you can bring healthy blood flow to that area, you now create the environment for change. All right. And that's where what a lot of women miss is they want to go directly to the solution before creating the environment for the solution to actually work, or for the efficacy or the length of that solution to actually take hold within the body. So we can do all the breathing we want, but if we have dehydrated pelvic floor muscles, if the fascia is really bound up, if the nerves in that area, can't send the messaging and receive the messaging from the brain, it doesn't really matter. And that's where the cooch ball was born. I'm the mom of 3 boys that had all different size little playground balls around our house when they were little. And what I realized was when I sat on the ball and the weight of my body was absorbed into the ball, and I breathed diaphragmatically, and I could feel the lift of the pelvic floor on my exhale and the lower on the inhale, I was now getting extra biofeedback. And in that 3-minute experience, get off the ball, it feels like the Grand Canyon is now located between your legs. And that's the sensation of a pelvic floor that is like a sponge ready to absorb all that amazing blood flow. So that really is, the breath and blood flow are the 2 really important pieces that often are missing.
I have an important question for you. Did your young boys ever go, Mom, what are you doing on my soccer ball again for the 5th time today?
Well, and it wasn't just me, because I got my husband, Jason, I was like, you got to come try this, right? And so they'd be like, why are you guys sitting on our hockey balls, right? Like, what?
And then when your kids were teenagers, they were like, geez, our parents are so weird.
Well, when they came into their teenage years, and that's when I was kind of just working on the development of it. They were they're like, why couldn't you call it anything else? The cooch ball and the gooch ball. Like, they were so embarrassed. And now, they're in their early 20s and their late teens. And I've got our middle son's a college golfer. Our youngest is going to go to play college golf in the US next year. And you better believe that when they're traveling, I just sent my son and his whole golf team gooch balls, because they use it as pelvic floor release. They use it as psoas release. And my husband swears he can get 20 more yards off the tee when he has been using his gooch ball.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
There is I hear almost nobody talk about this when it comes to breathing in more Western focused techniques and schools of thought around breathing. And even sort of typical yoga, they rarely talk about this, but in the more esoteric stuff, in Qigong, in more esoteric yogas, especially the more sexually oriented sort of traditions, yogic traditions, tantric traditions, these kinds of things. There is an emphasis on certain breathing techniques where you're not only feeling your diaphragm by your ribs and the top of your abdomen expand down, but you're actually opening up the pelvic floor diaphragm with each breath as well. It seems to be, it's something I've experimented with many, many times over the years. And I can drop into that practice with just sort of a moment of thought of thinking about it. I can sort of consciously go there, and I can do breathing where I relax that and expand that with each breath downward. And I notice when I do that I carry a lot of tension there. And there seems to be chronic tension that exists there unless I drop into this sort of conscious awareness of expanding it out. How many people are tight asses like me? Like where they're chronically carrying too much tension in their pelvic floor muscles.
Yeah, 100%. Like, literally everyone. I mean, even me, right? Like, it's the food we eat, when we sleep, when we travel, the Zoom call we just got off of, the text we just received, we just naturally absorb tension in that area. We do, right? And so, the tight ass is, it's not just figurative, it is literal, because the muscles of the anus and the sphincter, it's not like those 2 anatomical parts are just so completely disconnected. They are totally connected. And so, if we think that urinary incontinence is not talked about enough, you better believe that fecal incontinence is like on another planet.
Wow.
And yet, and listen, you guys, the urinary incontinence product industry this year will top $24 billion.
Wow.
Right? So there is a huge so too many of us believe that that is the solution, and that's not the solution, right? To get the newly designed adult diapers that you see on the commercial, the woman in the fancy business suit, or the construction guys are wearing because that's what they have to do. Like, no, 9 out of 10 of us, if we actually learned how to breathe properly, not be such tight asses, or when we are tight asses, to recognize it, like you said, and then make that inspired change to just be aware, because that's, so many of us are just unaware. Like, I'm sure there's people listening to us right now that are like, I don't even know, like, am I or am I not? Or, we've been trained in this world of the Kegel. And I just think that what I like to teach is just a little bit beyond the Kegel, because in most cases, a Kegel is taught as stopping the flow of urine and starting the flow of urine, right? As if a muscle is like a light switch. It's not. When you reach to pick up your water bottle, you're not going from complete muscular rest to complete muscular activation. There's a process in that, right? And so if we actually learn the visualization of drawing, and whatever you subscribe to, drawing the chi up and then melting it back down, or the elevator, whatever visualization you want to use, there is, just like you talked about, the diaphragm we breathe with, there is this pelvic diaphragm that is just as dynamic and beautiful, that just gets locked down for so many reasons. And I know, we chatted before about hormetic stress. And that's also super important when it comes to this part of the pelvic floor, because we do want moments where we stress it out in a good way. And even sexual intercourse can stress out the pelvic floor in a good way for both partners involved. So I want our audience to understand that it's not all like, these stressors are not always to move the needle in the wrong direction. Sometimes with the right stressors, or learning how to add advanced breathing techniques where you're holding your breath a little bit, and can I keep that energy of the pelvic floor lifted for an extended period of time and then let it melt back down. Like, that's it's kind of like what we're talking about today. You're starting in pelvic floor kindergarten, and then there's just so much learning that can happen to impact your life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. This conversation reminds me of, especially what we're just talking about, this kind of tension that's stored in the pelvic floor diaphragm. It reminds me of a clip that I heard many years ago from Alan Watts, one of my favorite sort of spiritual philosophers, who there's one clip, I won't remember it exactly, but he basically talks about how we store all this bodily tension when we are psychologically stressed, or when we have anxiety, when we're sort of nervous about something. It translates into more muscular tension in our body, as if it's as if our body is trying to fight our way out of this stress. And I can only imagine that the reason we're programmed that way, and actually, let me add one more layer to this. It seems to me, based on my own observation of myself, that there is nowhere where that tension goes faster and more intensely than the pelvic floor. For whatever reason, that area seems to tighten up the most in response to psychological stress and anxiety. The only thing that I can think of as to how this makes sense is, like, just from an ancestral perspective, that it's sort of the types of stressors that we were exposed to tended to be more physical stressors. For example, I found a snake on my property this morning when I woke up, and I went out to take my dogs up to my land, and on the main walkway of my house there was a snake. And I'm pretty sure there was a physical tightening response when I saw this snake, and particularly in my pelvic floor. In that context, it makes some sense for there to be like a physical response of muscular tone in response to that. Oh, I'm going to have to fight or flee this situation. I've got to jump to avoid getting bit by a snake or something like that. But most modern stressors are psychological and emotional. in nature, and yet we still mobilize this physical response to it. We still store all of this physical attention to it. It's interesting. It's bizarre, right?
It's so interesting. And, you made me remember, the pudendal nerve is the main nerve that goes from the brain into the genitals, the pelvic floor area, in both a man's and a woman's body. It's a sensory nerve, so it creates feeling, and it's a motor nerve, so it sends and receives messages. And I learned this just maybe 6 months ago, and it really did blow my mind. The Latin root of pudendal means ashamed.
Oh, wow. Now
All
it's
right.
all starting to make sense, huh?
So our main communication and sensory nerve from our brain to this area of our body is rooted, the Latin root of the word pudendal is ashamed. And I was like, there it is. Like, there, if we wondered if there was a connection, ancestrally and energetically and spiritually, there it is.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to think there's nothing that we should be born without any ashamed, sense of shame in that area. Yet how can it not impact us? And you're right, the snake is, yes, a physical, but for me, the snake could have come in the shape of a text today or a phone call, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So there you have it.
Yeah. Okay, so just to wrap up from a practical perspective, so tell people the 2 or 3 keys, practical keys that they should be focused on if they are struggling with pelvic floor dysfunction or a weak pelvic floor.
Okay, so the first, we'll start with posture. Posture plays a huge role in this, and simply, when you're standing, there's 26 bones in each foot. There's a big bone at the back of the foot called the calcaneus, which is our heel bone. If you understand the way you distribute weight through your foot, if you understand how to, it'll go a long way to start to support the structure of the pelvic floor in amongst all of our bones. So 60% of your weight on the heels of your feet, 40% of your weight across the widest part of your foot, and they're called the metatarsals, where the toes connect into the foot. If you can mechanically hold your weight in a more optimal position, it actually will take some of the stress, unnecessary stress and tension that you don't even realize you're adding into that hammock, okay, that bowl with your pelvic floor. When you're sitting, those bony bones in your butt, if you got to move flesh out of the way, get your ego, park it at the door, get the flesh of your butt out of the way, and feel those bony bones on your chair. And like a golf ball on a tee, you want to make sure that the weight of your body is on top of those bones. So from sitting and standing mechanically can go a long way to improving your pelvic floor health. The second I would say is that diaphragmatic breathing. And then like I said, there's lots of ways you can expand that once you get the basic inhale through your nose, exhale out of your mouth. If your hand was on your flat bone on your chest called your sternum, the other hand on your belly button. If there was a bullseye on that bottom hand, you want to be breathing into the bullseye, and on the exhale, breathing away from the bullseye. If you want to get a little technical or advanced with me, what the pelvic floor is doing there, when you're breathing into the bullseye, when you're inhaling, the pelvic floor is in its restful or descension phase. When you're exhaling, that's when it's in its lift phase. All right. And then I would say, here's the other thing, is that so many people are chronically dehydrated because they think that their bladder is the size of a peanut or a walnut. And in fact, our organs are going to be less functional when they're in a dehydrated state. So all I would like to just remind people is that when our body is properly hydrated, the systems are going to work more optimally. And instead of guzzling your water, is just take tiny little sips throughout the day. You're still going to get in the volume of water you need, but the cells are going to absorb that hydration in a different way. And you actually won't be running to the bathroom as much, because your bladder is going to be properly hydrated so that it can function, and that it doesn't have to just go right through the bladder and out. So those would be, we talked about blood flow a little bit earlier and being able to access that. So those would be my 3 tips. It really don't take no money, just some time and having it on your radar.
Yeah, the tip you gave, I just want to comment on one thing briefly. The tip you gave just now about drinking is very interesting. It's actually come to my attention only very recently that the rate of water consumption can influence our body's response to it. And this was something I never knew, and I think is an incredibly pervasive problem. This is the first time I'm mentioning it to my audience, but I hope that this will be a gold nugget for people listening. But just to emphasize the point you were making from a different perspective, basically, it's been shown that if you consume water very rapidly, the body will excrete more of it. It will hold on to less of it and excrete more of it. So there will be a hormonal response with things like antidiuretic hormone, and there are other hormones that are acting on the kidneys and the retention of water and salt and potassium. And basically, the rate that you're drinking water is affecting that. And the very short version of this is if you chug water rapidly, your body is going to excrete a lot of it. And if you sip it slowly, the body will hold on to much more of it. And this can make sense of why it's so commonly reported for people to say, oh, I'm drinking so many cups of water, but I feel chronically dehydrated. And you're actually, by chugging the glasses of water very rapidly, you're creating potentially a dehydrating effect. I don't know if the effect is necessarily net dehydrating, but it is certainly causing most of that water to be excreted rather than held on to. So I think it's a good point that is very rarely talked about. And I think you should add a fourth to this, no, with the cooch ball. Am I right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it is, it's a 3-minute practice, and I just feel like we're all deserving of at least 180 seconds of self-care. You can do your meditation when you're on the cooch ball. That's what I do in the morning. I check off a few boxes, and it literally is a co-branded product. So you just have to give it a half a turn, and there it says Gooch Ball. And, you know, my husband and I, even our boys, we all use the same Cooch and Gooch Ball. And it has, I mean, it's been amazing to be the creator of this product and hear just the success stories that are like from the little girl that was able to go to a sleepover with her friends, to the, you know, an 89-year-old client I had that called me from New York City that wanted to buy a Gooch Ball for her husband who was turning 92, because in her words, he was getting a little less spunky than he has been in previous years. So that's the spectrum. And I just thank you so much, Ari, for having me here today.
Yeah, it was an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed this conversation, and thank you so much for the work you're doing, Jana. And I guess two things you should let people know about. One is where they can go get the Cooch Ball. And two, you have a summit coming up, which I'm a speaker in. So let people know about that as well.
Okay, for sure. So coochball.com is where you can find all the information you need. And guys, for those of you listening, goochball.com. And ladies, if you're ordering one, start to plant the seed for your guy, because even
and inform him that he does not have to put it up his butt, because that was a mistake, an assumption that I made, which is why I gifted it to someone else. And had I known that I was not supposed to shove it up my butt, I might have held on to it.
You wouldn't be such a tight ass today if you had just taken one extra step and looked at the postcard.
That's right.
Yeah, it is. And you know what? And that's part of why I named it the Cooch and Gooch Ball, so that we could open the conversation, have a few laughs, and because people weren't even talking about it that way. So coochball.com and goochball.com. And then, yeah, my End Chronic Stress, Fatigue, and Burnout, the Medicine and Mindset Summit, is, I know we're going to have the link in the show notes, and I am so proud of this event. There's over 50 speakers, and like Ari said, he is one of them. I feel like this event, if you are looking to just whether you're dipping your toe in this world of natural ways of healing, or you crave the latest information from the world's top leading experts, this really is the event, and the way that the people on my summit have showed up as their authentic self to give bite-sized information that you can start to impact yourself and others today. That's the place to be.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jenna. It was a pleasure having you on, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Sounds great, Ari.
Hey there, this is Ari again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, if you found it valuable, please share it with your friends, share it with your family, help me get the word out there. Also, if you're on YouTube, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit that little bell to get notifications every time we release a new video or new episode of the podcast. And if you're listening to this, make sure to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for supporting my work at the Energy Blueprint. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I will see you in the next